one of the big values in the working class is to be frank, is to talk openly, is to not be like the bourgeoisie who hide things and don't say things. And I grew up in this culture, and in a way for me to talk about violent things, difficult things, private things, intimate things, is part of the culture where I grew up. And this is also what I'm trying to inject in literature. And that's also another reason why writing from class defector is always a little bit seen as suspicious, you know, because we have no shyness very often, you know. We are kind of too open. That's the story of my life. I go to dinners with a group of people, and I say so many intimate things about my private life and my sexuality, and then I go back to the hotel and I think, oh my God, what will they think about me? Before that, they thought I was a serious writer, but now they will think that I'm just a crazy boy. But for me, that's one interesting thing in literature is when people come from outside literature and suddenly inject in the literary field things that were kept away from literature, like Baldwin or Morrison did with black people, like many women's writers did with intimacy, with the body. And so what can we bring when we come from a different place? I think that autobiography is also part of it, you know, because there is this incredible scene that I'm obsessed with in the book of Marcel Proust, in the series of books, In the Search of Lost Time, in which at some point, you know, the narrator is reading a book, and the maid, Françoise, is not far from him. And she sees him reading a book, and she asks to the protagonist, who is growing up in this very high bourgeois / aristocratic milieu. He dreams of accessing the aristocracy. He's in the high bourgeoisie. And the maid asks him, what are you reading? And she asks him, is it a true story? And when the maid asks that to the narrator, there is a whole reflection, monologue from the narrator who says, oh, she's a maid, and therefore she doesn't understand that literature is the power of imagination, and it's the power of creating new world. And of course she's just a maid. She's so attached to the ground that she doesn't understand what real art is. And I remember when I read that, of course, I identified much more with the maid than I did with Marcel, even if I'm obsessed with Proust and I love him so much and he's one of my lovers, imaginary ones. I have a lot of imaginary lovers, Marcel Proust, Kylian Mbappé, I have a lot of them. And I remember reading this and thinking, you know, when I was a child in the working class, the idea of reality, of hyper-reality, was so important for us, like the maid of Proust. And you know, when we were going to the cinema, we wanted to see movies based on real facts, for example. You know, our favorite movies were when on the poster you had small letters with the title of the movie, and in big letters we had like inspired by a true story. And those people who produce movies and make commercial movies, they know how to talk to mass crowds. Because for us, reality was our category of belonging, you know? The same way that you can, no, it's true.
No, I'm suffering because I love you. No, I'm not.
And yeah, you know what I talk about because you know what it is. And when you are in the working class, the idea of like, will I pay my rent? Will I buy food? Will I be able to eat the house? Will I be able to survive? Is your daily question. And therefore, you identify to reality the same way that as a woman you can identify to women's story, as a gay person you can identify to gay person. It's the same level of category of belonging. We wanted reality. We were watching reality shows every day. I was watching 10 hours every day of reality shows. We wanted to see movies from true story. We were reading crime stories from the press. We wanted reality because we were trapped in reality, you know? It's like this Palestinian poet from Gaza who said, I would like to write about the birds, but as long as the sky is full of bombs, I can only write about bombs, you know? In certain situations, you have no choice but to be attached to reality. And that's not by chance if a lot of writers who wrote autobiographical bodies of works comes from the working class, naming James Baldwin, naming Tati, naming Annie Ernaux, naming Violette Leduc, naming a lot of them, because reality was something we could not afford to escape. But in order to escape it, we have to understand it first. You know, that's what John Scott calls the paradox of feminism. In order to be free from the condition of being a woman, you first have to acknowledge that you are a woman. When you go in the street and you say, I want more freedom as a woman, at the same time, you try to get free from this reality of what society makes you as a woman, but at the same time you state that you are a woman, saying, I want more freedom for me. Reality works the same way. You cannot escape it if you don't acknowledge it first. And only when you come from more dominant class, you can completely abstract yourself from reality. And I don't want that. Yeah.
Eu ouvi algumas vezes que eu tinha que, tá, legal, você já escreveu um monte de livro em primeira pessoa, falando de você, da sua família. Quando é que você vai fazer o livro sério? Quando é que você vai fazer o livro para valer? Quando é que você vai fazer o livro de verdade? E eu pensava, de verdade? Mais de verdade do que isso que eu estou contando, que é exatamente o que eu passei, o que eu senti, né? Mas escutei tanto isso mais nova, e aí acontece uma coisa muito incrível. Quando eu sento na frente de um computador e eu, em vez de escrever eu escrevo ela, a minha mão, na hora, faz tendinite. Não vai. Na hora, me dá um enjoo, um mal-estar, uma enxaqueca. Não sai. Não, e aí o meu psicanalista falou para mim, você já percebeu que não te interessa, de forma alguma, que a história não seja narrada a partir de você, que você não esteja dentro da história, não te interessa como a tua arte, você vai sofrer para fazer, você não quer fazer. Então, não é uma questão assim de, nossa, que difícil, preciso ensaiar muito que uma hora vai sair. Porque tem essa cobrança, né, da ficção como um lugar da literatura mais séria, pelo menos no Brasil. E de fato, não me interessa, não sai, né? E foi um alívio muito grande quando a Annie Ernaux ganhou o Nobel e veio todo esse discurso da importância de mulheres se narrarem, porque, para além de ser literatura e alta literatura, tem uma importância política de mulheres contarem as suas histórias, né? Tem a Tatiana Levy, que mora aqui em Portugal e é brasileira, e eu li todos os livros dela, porque muitas vezes a gente escreve também porque é insuportável manter dentro da gente. A coisa derrama. Precisa sair. E ela escreveu o livro Melhor Não Contar, que é incrível. Então, para além de ser literatura e alta literatura, e a gente tem que repetir isso, porque parece que quem está falando de si mesmo é uma viagem ególatra e não uma intenção literária, são livros que mexem com a gente em lugares de transformação, e não é autoajuda, é literatura mesmo. Mas assim, a quantidade de gente que, a partir do livro da Tatiana, falou que eu tenho força para falar o que eu vivi, né? E, claro, Tatiana Levy escreve bem pra caramba, é literatura, assim como Édouard. Então, a gente está... Annie Ernaux. Então, a gente está falando de textos autobiográficos, mas com uma preocupação literária gigantesca. Não é um textão de redes sociais, né? Mas eu acho muito interessante que nenhuma editora mulher nunca me pediu para eu ser diferente, não é?